Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers Arizona Cardinals, and recording on a Tuesday night, episode 519, is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Shout out to that podcast as always, especially because next week we will have a double. We will have two episodes where it's basically free shows for the original Draft Breakdown podcast with me as a guest, even though Seth and we'll have Justin Higdon on next week with Seth and me to talk about the Combine, which is underway, Seth. It feels weird schedule-wise, but we're doing our free agency preview now, and we're a couple of weeks away from free agency because otherwise we won't really get to talk about it, or we'll have to skip the Combine. And doesn't it feel a little bit different, the timing of everything this year?
Yeah, it's definitely different. And Justin and I were able to get together. He's traveling quite a bit, but we were able to get together last night and do a show and kind of do a small preview of the Combine to that extent, because the timing's just so different this year. And to be fair, I mean, there's not a whole lot of news about the Combine yet, except who's not going to do anything, right? Like that's been the
these Combine
weirdest
stuff. That the receivers are of the big three, those three big time receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze, is that Harrison is going the I'm not doing anything route. Neighbors isn't doing workouts, but Odunze is. And like, just as that news came out, I'm like, I guess that makes sense, because no one has any doubts at all about anything about Harrison or Neighbors. And Odunze, his agility and athletic testing, like the speed testing, would be big for him, because he is a bigger-bodied guy, as you and Justin described him as a deep ball merchant, a 50-50 ball merchant, to be more than just a possession guy.
Yeah, and you look at it, and this is going to be a really interesting one, because nobody's throwing either. Like the tier one quarterbacks, if you will, are not throwing. And so instead you're getting the tier two quarterbacks, and I made the joke last night, and it's a joke I stole, so I didn't come up with it. I'm not that clever, but of course JJ McCarthy is throwing because nobody saw him throw in college, right? I mean, that's but you look at it, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels had already said they're not going to participate in any kind of athletic events, and then Drake May followed suit today. You and I were recording, February 27th on a Tuesday. And then, like you said, Marvin Harrison's going for some interviews. Neighbors is going for some interviews. He's going to do testing at his pro day.
Harrison's not doing anything. He's like, nope.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, he's getting praise, right? He's getting praise for not doing anything and kind of resetting things in that nature.
It's interesting, because I know it's agent. Well, he doesn't have an agent, but
it's probably father driven.
Oh
yeah.
Yes, it's father driven, talking to reporters and saying that he hasn't even been training for any Combine drills, opting instead to do football drills.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it was actually fairly high praise today, from people that are saying, and that would come from a guy like Marvin Harrison Sr., having been in the league and still having friends and contacts in the league that are saying, like, the biggest issue we see are rookies that are not ready because they've been training to work out for 6 months, and they haven't been doing any actual football stuff. And you and I joke about it all the time, and you'll hear that if you subscribe to the Patreon, you'll hear this. But Justin and I literally talked about that. I'm willing to wager that either Brock Bowers does not weigh in or does not test at the combine. He will do one or the other, but he won't do both. And the reason why is if he weighs in, he's going to weigh in the mid 240s, maybe upper 240s.
And that'll have him suffer in the athletic testing.
Right. And so then he'll test at the Georgia Pro Day or vice versa, right? Like he'll test, he won't weigh, he'll do all the tests and stuff and run that mid 4.5. That makes him look great. And then when he weighs in and he's, 6'3", 246, people are gonna be like, wow, this guy's just, and so that's the thing. It's manipulating things now, right? It's really finding a way. And we saw that with Kyler. We saw that with Bryce Young. They're doing that now. Lamar Jackson has never run, but to be fair, Lamar and Kyler never needed to run. I mean, what they did is otherworldly. But yeah, it's just interesting how the event has changed, and I blame the NFL for making it a television-based event instead of what it used to be, which was, hey, let's get some information, let's get together, let's talk trades, let's talk free agency, do all that stuff. Now it's like, let's see how much money we can make on 5 days of showing guys running around and lifting things and it's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's a lot of fun, but it's still like it's lost the shine of what it used to be.
And it'll take time. But the combine, and we've talked about this before, the actual drills are pretty antiquated, especially with the technology that there is for game film. As you can, there are next gen stats and analytics that you can look at for a guy's agility, for their top speed, their breakaway speed, their early speed. But because we don't have long-term data on that, until there are years of data for prospects coming out in addition to the traditional things, scouting is still heavily based on player comps. And to have player comps, you have to have the same things done. So height, weight, the same drills and same times to be able to do that. So it's going to take years and years to transition out of that. So we don't know. Nobody does a 40-yard dash in the NFL. Like, linemen aren't running top speed for 40 yards, but it's still a good measure of something that is a transferable skill for successful linemen.
Right. And that's the thing is, you have kind of baselines that you want to see hit on certain things and like you said, historical data that we can then plug in and be like, obviously the one from all those years ago that we talked about was a guy that, you and I both liked. And it was a great learning experience for both of us, but it was Dorian Johnson, right? Like had one of the worst 3-cone times imaginable, literally the first percentile. And if it was something that we had, at the time paid attention to better, we'd have been like, this is a terrible pick, because
even though universally his pick by the Cardinals was viewed plug and play guard.
Right. Everybody loved him, but he's literally like a tank trying to move. Like, there's no lateral movement with Dorian Johnson. And so you don't get those, or don't get that information right without the testing. And so, like, it's starting to get more difficult, to wade through the minutia in order to get this information. And then people are figuring out too, right, that if, you're not good at running the 3-cone, don't run the 3-cone, right? like we just will skip that drill. And while that can be its own red flag, at the same time, it is good just to kind of see it. So it's fun to look at. I mean, there's a lot of still great information. It's just, it's unfortunate that it's turning into something different than what it used to be, which, was a great information gathering opportunity.
Yep, but that's not what we're talking about in this show. That will be next week's 2 shows when Justin, Seth, and I talk Combine, and this is where I will get, no, those of you who've listened to the show for the number of years know that Seth and Justin are big on draft stuff, and I read stuff. I have opinions on things, but I don't build opinions about who I like until I've read a lot of stuff. And as you guys know, that I trust a lot of guys. Seth and Justin are 2 of the guys I listen to and trust a lot of their information. This is not actually a draft show. Again, that's next week. This show, episode 519, is our free agency preview. So let's get into that. We're going to go through 3 different parts. We're going to prioritize who are the now we've already done this to some extent where we went through every single Cardinals free agent of their own, and we went through sign, let go, But we're going to name the guys that we think, okay, target these guys, re-sign these guys. Then we're going to look at the free agents that are expected to hit the market. Offense and defense, we're going to go position by position. Notable guys, do they fit, this and that. Our show on Thursday, episode 520, we will actually we'll talk about free agents of philosophy that we are starting to understand with Monty Austin-Fort and the Cardinals. And then likewise, we're going to go through and kind of what are we going to do? It's going to be a mix of prediction and what we would do if we were in Monty's shoes. So let's get started with the Cardinals' own free agents. If we can kind of just go down, go one player at a time, or let's kind of do a couple of players at a time. Who you would re-sign, like who would you prioritize? Like we're not going to mention the guys that we don't want, but we'll talk about the few players that we think. Who is your number one must bring back from last year's team who's a free agent?
It's tough because it's not the same, or I guess same is the wrong word, but it's not as cut and dry as it has been, right? Like you look at this roster and you see what they did last year, and it makes it difficult to just be like, oh, this guy needs to come back or this guy needs to come back. And so, and then you add in the fact that a lot of these guys you didn't even really get a good look at, right? I mean, a guy that I was interested in was Carlos Watkins. We liked that kind of base salary pickup, right? We both were very excited about the chance or the opportunity to see LJ Collier back, or see what he could do. And so it makes it tough. I think I would go, if we're not talking the restricted free agents, obviously with Greg Dortch, I would probably.
Well, and technically, Greg Dortch is not a restricted free agent. He's an exclusive rights.
Yeah, exclusive rights. That's right.
And which means if the Cardinals want, they have him. He can't go with anyone else if they tender him an offer.
Right. And so, I look at it. I would probably start by leaning LJ Collier as the guy that I would, especially because I'm assuming he's going to be cheap. I mean, he's literally done nothing in the NFL. And then his first chance to really, really prove himself, he got hurt, super early. So
absolutely true.
And so I think it is almost an ideal situation where you just talk about the fact that you've got a guy that fits a massive need and a guy that needs an opportunity to show who he is, and that's not going to be expensive. Like, it's kind of, for me, it's kind of the ideal fit. But it's interesting because, like, you just go through the true free agents, they're unrestricted free agents, and it's only a list of 15 guys, right? Like, it's not a huge list. And so I would start with Collier, and it's not sexy. It's not even really exciting, but he's the guy I would want back and I think a lot of it is because I know it's going to be right around the same price, right? 1.3 million,
Yeah, something
1.23.
something
But
really minor because he like it was a prove it deal and he didn't prove anything.
right, and I'm looking at like what Carlos Watkins got, because I don't always remember how the veteran scale goes, but if he's around what Josh Woods or Carlos Watkins or any of those guys are at, which is
Yeah,
sub
those are
$2 million, bring that on. I think
absolutely.
I think that's a great fit.
For me, and this is actually for our network touchdown wire. Every editor writes for a team. The number one priority, I said, the one of their own free agents to resign. Honestly, for me, is tight end Jeff Swain.
Yeah, I like
Um,
that. I thought about Swaim too. Like
and
that's
now
the
Collier's on
funny
my
thing.
list. I will mention the Collier's a guy. I'm like, yes, I want him back for all the reasons that you mentioned. But if my number one guy is Jeff Swain because he fills a niche role that they badly need on offense, and he filled it perfect, like kind of the way that Cliff Kingsbury and his staff raved about Max Williams. That's kind of how they talked about Jeff Swaim this past year. And he's the perfect complement to the youthful promise of Trey McBride and Elijah Higgins. McBride, who is just right there on the brink of absolute stardom. Elijah Higgins, who showed late in the year, like if it weren't for McBride, that fans and people would be very excited about the upside about Higgins because we've gotten excited about probably a half a dozen tight ends over the last decade.
And guys that are worse than him too.
Yeah, and Swaim, he's that veteran. Now, granted, he's at age 31, and we know that the Cardinals they had like 5 guys that were 30 on their entire roster. So I don't know if that's going to be kind of a hard and fast thing. But bringing back Swaim because of his skill set, the veteran leadership, he is a tried and true blocking tight end. That's exactly what you need on that offense, and so he's my number one. That's like I said, got to bring him back because one, he'll be cheap. He was 1.7 million, 450,000 in guarantees, and they signed him like by getting a training camp. Hollywood Brown is my number 2 priority. I'm not saying sign him at any cost, but of the players that they have for Kyler Murray, for the camaraderie with him, the friendship there, the chemistry, the way he actually just cooked defensive backs, and with the assumption if they go with like a Marvin Harrison or a Malik Neighbors or a Roma Dunze at the top of the draft, you can basically put Hollywood full-time inside, and I think that is a wonderful role for him. Not that he can't play X, but you can use his size. Basically, you put him in the role that you had Rondale Moore, and you just let Rondale Moore, if you keep him around, literally be the gadget player that he is. You manufacture touches for him, and then you go with Harrison, like big-time rookie, Hollywood, and Michael Wilson, and boom, and then you're set. And so for me, he's my number 2. Swaim 1, Hollywood Brown 2. Who's your number 2 guy to bring back?
Yeah, I would probably say Hollywood. I mean, at the right cost, 1 year, 10 to 12 million. I think that'd be an ideal situation. Um, the other guy that I was going to mention that's kind of funny is Aaron Brewer. Like, what's the plan at long
Yeah,
snapper? And you've kind of mentioned it a couple times. I mean, astutely, that they've got a guy on deck that they really like that got injured, and then they brought him in. So is that the plan? So it'll be interesting to see how that all kind of plays out. But it'll be interesting because this is not a group. I mean, there are a lot of guys that you're like, hey, I'm fine bringing them back. You mentioned Jeff Swain, Carlos Watkins, Antonio Hamilton, but there's not. I mean, it's weird to say this, but there's not anybody that you're like, if this guy leaves, it's catastrophic,
yeah.
which is good and bad, right? I mean, obviously it's good because you were a 4-loss or a 4-win team anyways. So you churning the roster's a good thing, but it's bad in the sense of like some of these guys were some of the only talented players on the roster. So like maybe, you do need to bring him back.
Yeah, my next guy, I have a pair of either ors for me that come next for this. So I don't see bring them both back, but either bring back Tristan Colon or Elijah Wilkinson. They both spent time in the starting lineup at left guard, and both, Wilkinson's a little bit older. He gives you tackle guard flexibility. Cologne gives you guard center versatility. Cologne's only 26. He's been a starter pretty much his whole career until last year, and Wilkinson has been a spot starter most of his career. He's been a guy that's filled in, who's been in and out of the lineup. But just in terms of continuity, before you go out and get the guy that you want starting left guard, or draft the guy that you want to start a left guard, I want to bring back one of those two guys to build on. And again, it's probably going to be 1 year less than $2 million, which that's perfect for a guy that might start, might not start. I'm cool either way.
Yeah, those aren't bad situations, right? And you want to have guys in this whole situation that can be here. The other guy, and I know fans are going to kill me for this, but Elijah Wilkinson. I mean, if you get him at 1.2 million again,
it's fine.
And he's your worst offensive lineman, you're like, oh, okay, that's not a bad thing, right?
Yeah. I also go either or at linebacker. Josh Woods or Chris Barnes. I'm good with either one of those guys. I don't know if you need both, especially if you're going to potentially, if Owen Papo can take the next step in terms of role, and or they bring in a different, if we talk about free agency, one of the guys that we've talked about is Drew Tranquil, guy like that. But if you bring, especially if you're going to have someone else that you target in free agency, then either Woods or Barnes, for me, I think is important to have either to start alongside or to have in your back pocket to start alongside Kaiser White, or to be if White has to miss time, or if the new guy that you bring in has to miss time.
Let me ask you this. Are those guys a higher priority? Because I would say they are to me. Are those guys a higher priority to you than Zeke Turner at this point?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Zeke has been a career special teamer. Especially if you like what you've got in Papo,
it might be time just.
I think it's right that these special teams guys, they're going to have a spot in the league forever as long as they're able to play. But you often see them have to transition from one team to another after about 5 or 6 years. Chris Banjo did that. He was there with the Packers, then he was with the Saints, and he was with the Cardinals. Charles Washington did with the Lions, and we did with the Cardinals. Justin Bethel has done, and now granted, with Bethel with the Cardinals, he also elevated to kind of, they hoped he was a starter, and it didn't really work out, but he's still playing. And so I think it's kind of, if what you want, I think Zeke Turner elevates to the next level of special teamer, where you start getting, like Dennis Gardick got more money. Granted, that was because of his defensive upside. Would he, he's going to look for more than the $2 million? Maybe you could get him a 2-year, $4.5 million, $5 million deal somewhere. But I don't think that the Cardinals would. I don't think that's what the Cardinals should do. I'd be fine if they come back, but he's definitely not a priority for me.
Yeah, and I would agree with all of that. I was just curious what your thought process was.
Do you have anyone else that's and like you, I say Collier, and I think for me, I think it's Collier or Watkins, maybe. I think it's kind of like either or for me. Anyone else, because I've got a couple other guys that I say I want them to bring back.
No, I mean, I wouldn't mind Leckie.
That's my guy. That's the one guy I like because he's young. He really kind of found a niche with the car, in this defense. Remember, he was disappointing, right? There was upside. He didn't quite do things, but when they put him back, basically nose tackle, he had a really he went from being disappointing to like starter. He was starter. It kind of like the opposite of what Rashard Lawrence did.
Right, exactly.
But got even more so than Aaron Brewer. Got to re-sign that punter, Blake Gillikin, unless you're gonna bring my man Austin McNamara from Texas Tech to punt for you. I think Gillikin he was great. Like,
right.
Just take care of that. Don't mess with the battery. I don't know if maybe Aaron Brewer. I don't know if you can prioritize him or you tell him, hey, are you playing? Because I guess at 34 years old, you've still got a few years left, but it's probably going to be like a year-to-year type thing, I'm guessing.
Right, exactly.
Anyone else of note? Obviously, Greg Dortch will be back. He's an exclusive rights free agent, so if the Cardinals tender him, he'll be back. But there's nobody else on this list that I'm like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Maybe Bobby Price for special teams purposes. Antonio Hamilton for me is, if nothing else works out.
I was gonna say it's that last second type thing.
Yes, that's okay. We're gonna go find some cornerbacks. Oh, no one. Okay, then I guess we'll bring back Ham.
Right, exactly.
And in fairness, he hit age 31. This is his age 31 year. So this is when if you're building young, you want to start transitioning to those younger guys. Coming up next on the Rise of Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the notable free agents at the different positions that the Cardinals will be looking at this offseason. That's coming up next on Rise of Red. We're back on the Rise of Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to look at the offensive side of the ball. Not necessarily, but we're going to look at different roles. And so we'll go position by position. Who's notable there that could be of importance? So we'll start at quarterback. We're not looking for starting quarterbacks. So who are the quarterbacks worth looking at as potential backups? Some names to kind of throw at you right off the top. Jacoby Brissett, Mitch Trubisky, Tyrod Taylor, Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston, Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew, Teddy Bridgewater, Tyler Huntley, and then Carson Wentz, maybe. Blaine Gabbert, I don't know why he would leave Kansas City. Matt Barkley, he's still in the league. Trevor Siemian, Mason Rudolph. Any of those guys throw any interest or any intrigue for potential targets for the Cardinals? I don't know if they plan on bringing someone in like a solid veteran backup, or if they believe that Tune is the guy, because Kyler's at the point of his career, you don't need to pair him. You don't need to pair him with a veteran like Colt McCoy before. Kyler is the veteran now, and so if you saw enough from Clayton to be okay, take the next step. What do you do next? Are you interested for the Cardinals to look at any of those backups?
The only one that really intrigues me is Tyrod Taylor. I think I mentioned that Jake Browning, because he didn't look too terrible, but he's in the same boat as
because he's exclusive
rights. Yeah, so I don't think he's going to get there. So Tyrod, I mean, you're probably going to have to pay him $5 million, and if it's over $5 million, because he's is a veteran and things of that nature, but he is 34. He's going to be 35 this year, so he's older. So is it worth it? I think Tyrod would be the one guy. And if you got him at 2 years, $7-8 million, I would be okay with that. But outside of that, some of the names are intriguing, but there's just been so many issues surrounding them. A lot of them, obviously Jacoby Brissett has been nice, but does he want a chance to start? Even though he's kind of failed everywhere he's gone. Is Mason Rudolph really going to leave Pittsburgh with kind of just being baked in there all the time? It seems like. Obviously, a guy like Gardner Minshew probably is going to.
Well, and I think here's the thing: Minshew, I think, leveled himself up.
Right. And so you've got a lot of like guys that are intriguing, but none that are like, oh yeah, that's why it would be Tyrod. Like I think
Tyler
Tyrod's
Huntley, I kind of like Tyler Huntley for
I
his
love
age.
I do yeah, I do love that one. I just don't know if he gets there.
Yeah,
Right?
that's true. And you know,
But that is a great one.
but yeah, I'm not like. Does it really matter who the backup quarterback is if it's not Kyler Murray playing? Because on too many rosters, and the Cardinals are this way. Are they even like? Is there any chance of being competitive anyway without Kyler? So you might as well roll with Clayton, right?
Right. If you're gonna suck, at least suck bad enough to, you know, get a good draft pick out of it type thing.
Yeah.
Um, because you do, you mentioned it, like if the Chiefs lose Patrick Mahomes, they're probably an 8-9 win team. So like getting to the playoffs. Now it's different if you're like, oh, Mahomes coming back, but like if they lose Mahomes for the year, or the Bengals were great, a great example this year. Everybody loves what Jake Browning did, but this is a team that, won 9 games but didn't make the playoffs. And now they're picking, 18th, 19th. Is was that worth it? I mean, because they weren't competing for a Super Bowl. And even if they get in, like nobody was buying them to really compete.
Yeah, and
So,
and mind you, that was a team that was loaded offensively
right.
and defensively.
Right, exactly. So it's like at that point, you know, I get the like stay afloat type things, and I get it. You get the Nick Foles season every once in a while, but like you go through the history of the NFL, and it's very few and far between. And typically, those teams, like you said, are loaded. And you mentioned it, like Kansas or not Kansas City, Cincinnati, completely loaded. Their season was lost because of the quarterback. I mean, Pittsburgh's the perfect example, really, right? I mean, and it's not because they lost Kenny Pickett, but like you can have a really, really good roster, a Hall of Fame coach, but you don't have the quarterback. You're just gonna continue to spit out 9-10 win seasons and first round playoff exits, and then not be able to address that. So like, unless it's a situation where the guy is just not good, and you can point at a number of those examples, like Atlanta, for instance. By the way, did you see what Raheem Morris said about the quarterback situation in Atlanta? Oh man, what way to endear yourself to your own team, right? Like right away.
Yeah.
But like the Atlanta situation, you know, losing is not necessarily like it's not fun. And as Cardinals fans, we should know that more than anybody, right? But like it's not a fun situation, but sometimes it is for the best because it puts you in a position to make a better choice
Yeah.
or have the chance to make that choice. So yeah.
Looking at the running back, the Cardinals do not have a priority at running back because obviously you've got James Conner under contract. You've got Michael Carter under contract. And so you're not going to be looking for a first tier. If you're looking at a running back, you're looking at a middling, maybe. I don't know if you're looking like niche aging or compete with Michael Carter, Amari DiMercato type guy. And so obviously like the names, the running back class is loaded, especially because they none of them got franchised. So Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, Gus Edwards, who's he's going to want to get paid after what he's done in Baltimore. And so Devin Singletary, Buffalo, DeAndre Swift, those are like, but the Cardinals aren't going to be in play for any of those guys, right? Then none of them, none. That will not. And so we're looking at other guys of note down the line. I don't know where people stand around the league for guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Boston Scott is a guy that you could look at seeing. You go Salvin Ahmed, Matt Breida, Rashad Penny. hurt all the time. Jerick McKinnon, he's 30. He'll be his age 32 year. Antonio Gibson. I don't know if I'm enamored with, honestly, any of those guys, right?
No, I think with what you have, you go into this with what you have, and if a guy presents himself late in free agency, you go for it. If a guy presents himself in the draft, you go for it, and that's kind of where you leave it.
Wide receiver. We go wide receiver. This is where, T. Higgins tagged, franchise tag, which we kind of, I guess, expect, but he's going to be looking at 21, almost 22 million a year. The names out there are fun. You've got Mike Evans. You've got Odell Beckham, whatever. Tyler Boyd. Michael Thomas, who feels like he must be 30, who hasn't played in 10 years, even though he's 31 years old. DJ Chark. Kendrick Bourne. Paris Campbell's an interesting name. Mecole Hardman, the Super Bowl, hero there at the end, but has been largely disappointing. Josh Reynolds is an interesting guy. My goodness, Calvin Ridley's 30. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you miss a couple years, right?
Then you go down the line. There's a bunch of old guys. You've got Van Jefferson, who kind of Sterling Shepard. Equanimeous St. Brown hasn't done much in the league. Scott Miller, if you like speedy slot guys in the Patriot way, or Bucks. Kind of like there's lots of players, but Gabriel Davis is an interesting one for me, because he does some other stuff. Juwan Jennings as well. Anybody out there that as you're going down this line, you're like, that's an intriguing thing, or are we at the point where we're just saying you're taking a receiver at the top of the draft, but with their void at tackle, can we count on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I don't know if they can count on it.
Noah
and
Brown's
so,
another one.
right. And so you just kind of look at it, and it makes it tough. I mean, the reality is, obviously, if you're going to bring in a wide receiver, you probably want them to be a guy that is going to make an impact. And so, those are few and far between to start with. So, you look at it, like you said, Mike Evans. From there, it's kind of pick your flavor. I don't think, I mean, has Calvin Ridley done more than Marquise Hollywood Brown to like deserve the likely payments he's going to get? I mean, they're talking, and now market value, is what it is, but they're talking about him getting a 4-year, $70 million contract.
Ooh.
Like, and like you said, he'll be 30 when this the first year of that contract ends, December 20th. So he'll be 30. I mean, he had 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. Is that worth 17 million? That's the hard thing. So you look at it, it's just these guys, it makes it difficult, man, to project. Michael Pittman's an interesting one, but I feel like you can get a Michael Pittman level player, and that's not to say anything negative about him. I think he's a very good talent, but I think you can get a Michael Pittman level player in the draft at 27 or 35.
Yeah.
So do you want to pay him 23 million a year? Like that's where you're at with this. So, I think you kind of hit it on the head with the Hollywood Brown thing. Obviously cost is part of it, and they've said as much, but I mean, if you get him at a 1 year, 12 to 14 million, I think that's a steal
Yeah.
comparatively to what some of these guys are going to get. I mean, we're seeing numbers thrown around that are ludicrous. I mean, a guy like that I really like, Josh Reynolds, that played for the Lions with the Rams before that, right?
Yes.
They're talking about him getting like a 2-year, $15 million deal. Now that's not crazy, $7.5 million, but like you just look at what he's done.
And what he's gonna like. He's been a perpetual number 4, number 3 receiver, right?
Right. And not just that, but he'll be 30. Like, and so, so all of that, plays into this idea. I mean, he had a career year this year with 608 yards and 5 touchdowns. So, it's just interesting to see how that all goes and where everything fits and stuff like that. And like I said, I would not sign anybody unless you're going to get Mike Evans. I mean, Mike Evans, and he's going to be 31, by the way. So like this 3-year, 75 million that he's looking for, he's worth it. Like, I don't want anybody to think I'm saying he's not worth it. I mean, Mike Evans is literally going to the Hall of Fame. Like, there's not a question about it. But do you really want to sign a guy that's 31 to this roster? Like, I feel like that's the signing you make next year if things go as planned this year, right?
Yeah, that would make sense. Tight end. Again, what we're kind of looking at is more on the blocker side of things. Maybe has some receiver upside, but veteran, he's not a number 1. He's a number 2, number 3 tight end on your roster. And there's some names on here, but the Cardinals aren't going to look at those guys. Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz, Gerald Everett, Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant. None of those that they fit. They got their Trey McBride, and so you have to go down the line a little bit. If you want to go old, Mercedes Lewis, he's going to be age 40. He's been in the league forever. Ross.
And he's kind of exactly what you mentioned with Jeff Swaim, right?
Great, but he's just
he's just really old. Yeah, phenomenal blocking tight end, a guy that's gonna offer you some things. There's one guy that really intrigues me, and again, salary projections are what they are. So when we say this, we're going off of what the information we're given, not necessarily what we think they're going to get. But Adam Trotman, the tight end with the Broncos, he's projected right around 3 years, 10 million. I mean, so $3.5 million a year. That's not outrageous at all. He's always been, a very good blocking, secondary receiving tight end. 27 years old, kind of fits exactly what they're looking for, right?
Yeah.
In all of that situation. So I wouldn't mind something like that. I think he would be an excellent, fit in that situation. The other guy is Brock Wright, but he's going to be a little more expensive because he's shown up.
And he's a restricted free agent, so we'll have to wait and see if they tender him.
I just don't know if Detroit's going to have the ability. But you're right, he is a restricted free agent. But yeah, but I mean, like you said, Noah Fant, Mike Gesicki, those guys are the obviously Dalton Schultz more than anybody.
Yeah.
Those are the sexy ones, but like you
Cardinals already have their sexy tight end.
Right. Let me throw one at you that's interesting, that burst onto the scene, completely fell off the face of the earth, dealt with some injuries, and then had what I would consider a okay year last year. Robert Tonyan. He's going to be 30. I'm assuming you could probably get him for like a 2-year, $3 million contract type thing.
I wouldn't hate that. My for me, priority Swaim, and then after that, I'm like,
and then a veteran in the same mold, right?
Right. You could go some familiar names. The 49ers have Ross Dwelly and Charlie Werner. who are their non-George Kittle guys who are hitting free agency. You could go with like a Johnny Munt with Vikings, Blake Bell with the Chiefs, though he's probably going to want to re-sign with the Chiefs because why wouldn't
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think anybody's ever leaving the Chiefs.
But yeah, those are just, those guys.
Just guys, like you said, and I think there's a lot of them. I mean, there's a couple interesting ones, like you said, Harrison Bryant out of Cleveland that never really lived up to the expectations of being a second round pick, maybe a third. He went in the fourth. Okay. But, he's never really lived up to expectations. Like I said, Troutman, Josiah DeGura, same type of idea he was the third rounder. Okay. Out of Cincinnati a couple of years ago, just hasn't really lived up to expectations. I mean, those guys the thing is with those guys, that's why you go back to Jeff Swaim, because you know what you're getting.
Exactly.
Right. Like there's no surprise or like disappointment. You're just like, oh, this guy is a 25 catch, 200 yard, good blocking tight end. Perfect. That's exactly what I need. I mean, that's basically, who he is to a T, and you can get that really easily.
Yeah. We go to the tackle position. We're going to look tackle both sides. As we talked about on the last show, is that we have heard the plan, if we can call it a plan, is that Paris Johnson will stay at right tackle. But I'm not going to assume that. I'm not going to assume that's the case. And so tackles of note whom the Cardinals could sign that are starting caliber. If you want to go old, you've got Dwayne Brown. You got who's 39. Tyron Smith.
They should sign both Dwayne Brown and Mercedes Lewis and just get that average age like way up there.
Yeah. You could also go Donovan Smith, he's 31. He's not old, but also he signed a 1-year deal last year. You could go George Fant, who is the starting right tackle for the Texans this past season. Tyron Smith, an interesting one that he'll probably, but names that are probably going to get paid. Okay, you're looking at Mekhi Becton, Jonah Williams, even though Becton's had an up and down career with injuries. The guys that you can kind of expect to try to get kind of paid. Mekhi Becton, Jonah Williams. You go down the line. Probably Isaiah Wynn still can command some of a paycheck. Jason Peters is like, no, he's not going to get paid, but there's not then the rest, it's not like, is there the Yelda Froholt of tackles?
No, I think I've said this before, but I think the only one that kind of could make sense would be like a Donovan Smith type, that you're going to get him on a 1-year, $5-10 million. What did he make last year? I think it was like $3 million, right?
I think it was $9 million. Let me double check, because I've got him up here now. Donovan said, "Oh no, it was $3 million." You're right.
Okay, yeah. So you get him on a 1-year, let's say $5 million, because it's not the Chiefs, it's the Cardinals, right? Like, and so you get him on a 1-year, $5 million deal, because you look at it and you go, okay, we're here's what I'll say if they sign like a Donovan Smith, and it doesn't have to be Smith, it's just that type. They don't like either of the left tackles enough to draft one, because we know that they're not afraid to play a rookie at the tackle position. I mean, they literally just did it. Or, and so they don't like the tackles enough to draft one at 4 or trade back enough, to get one. And then whoever they like in the 27 to 35 range, you can never guarantee that they'll be there. And they aren't sold that they'll be ready to go from day one.
Right.
And they obviously, with the hump thing, you have no idea when and where he'll be available, if he'll be available, if he'll even be on the roster.
Correct, because
there was a very non-committal Monty Ossenford on there.
Correct. Yeah, and so cutting him, which that would suck. That looks bad. I get it. I get it, but that looks bad if you cut a guy that's got a torn ACL as your captain. That's terrible. That's terrible. Let's look to the interior. Obviously the Cardinals need a left guard, but there's names out there whether you're going left guard or right guard. And maybe I'll throw some centers in there. You don't necessarily need to because they've got Yelda Froholt under contract and got John Gaines. But the guards out there, you've got Cody Whitehair, who's going to be 32 this season from the Bears. Kevin Zeitler, 34 this year of the Ravens. Hey, Mason Cole just got cut. He's been the starters for the Steelers the last 2 years. The guy from the Halapolivati Vaitai over in Detroit.
I believe you.
You're like, bless you.
I mean, this is the one place I could see them making a splash.
Yeah. And if you're gonna splash for a guard,
you probably want Kevin Dotson. Dotson is the best, he was one of the best guards in the NFL last year. He's going to command a lot. I mean, we're talking 4 years, $60 million type of contract. He's going to command some money. He's going to be 28 this year. So, that 4 years is going to take you to 32.
Yeah, he's going to be that. That's kind of like that Justin Pugh range, like when they signed him, only it's elevated because he got $9 million a year.
Right.
And
inflation is
definitely real.
But the alternative is, and I don't hate it, I really don't, is you take a guy like Andres Pete, who's from Arizona, and get him on a 1 year, $4 or $5 million deal. I'm not sure exactly what it would be, but $4 or $5 million. A Kevin Zeitler, one of these older gentlemen that can still play. I mean, the problem with Pete has been, staying healthy. That's just been his biggest issue. But, if you can go get Zeitler on a 1 year, $5-6 million deal, or Pete on the same type of thing at their age. And then it's kind of the same thing that they did with Beach, right? And obviously it'll be at a higher range, but it's like, okay, you're healthy. You played a solid year. Do you want to come back next year type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And you just kind of do that every year. I think if you don't want to make a splash, which you have the ability to, that's the nice thing.
A couple of
right?
splash guys I kind of like, potentially. Jonah Jackson out of Detroit. 27, came from Ohio. Like, I remember when he came out of the draft, we really liked him then. Damian Lewis wouldn't be a splash, but he was one of the Seahawks' better linemen.
And he would, it's always fun, and I'm not sure if not everybody's familiar with Kevin Dotson. He's the Rams starting guard.
Yes.
So, Dotson, Lewis, talking about these gentlemen, weakening an opponent on top of everything, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not a bad deal. Robert Hunt is another one from Miami.
Yes. And he's good. And he's good.
Yeah. And he's looking at so Dotson's like the top tier. He's looking 16, 17 million. Hunt's like tier 2, and he's looking like between 11 and 13 million. So like, it's still going to be you're still talking like 4 years, 48 million. Maybe you can get away with 45 million, but like, you're still talking a lot of money for those guys. Isn't it funny though that the Dolphins both of their guards hit free agency at the same time? Like, that's really poor planning.
Yeah, that's not ideal.
I mean, it's one thing. It's one thing if one of them's Andres Pete or Kevin Zeitler or one of those guys that's just older, right? But yeah, to have a 27-year-old and a 26-year-old hit free agency at the same time, it's just not ideal for a franchise.
Right. Coming up next on the Rise Up Red podcast, the Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball for what we could be looking at for the Cardinals there. That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web. The defensive line, the defensive interior, the interior defenders. Who are we liking? I mean, obviously, you've got some really, Chris Jones, and you've got DJ Reader and the Fletcher Cox and Sheldon Rankin. There are some names out there. There are some names out there that you could go out and get. We mentioned, before the Super Bowl, so nice name. So Chris Jones, he's going back to the Chiefs. He basically said as such. But, some names that wouldn't be terrible. Okay. You've got, obviously, Leonard Williams wouldn't be terrible. He's good, but he's expensive. We're talking expensive. Fletcher Cox, old, but expensive. You could go with Sheldon Rankins. You could do Ashawn Robinson, Tear Tart, Javon Kinlaw. Probably the most notable guy that's going to see a big jump in paycheck, and that's going to be Christian Wilkins out of Miami. Shelby Harris, who's older. Greg Gaines out of Tampa Bay. And then after that, we talked about Sebastian Joseph Day before the Super Bowl. Then you've got some old guys. We won't necessarily name them. Carlos Watkins on the Cardinals. Neville Gallimore out of the Cowboys. He's that younger, didn't really build into something but when he came out of college, we both kind of liked him for what he could have been.
Yeah, we did.
Or here's another Justin Matabike, but he'll be expensive.
And he's going to be expensive, and he's probably going to get franchised. When you look at it, there's a couple of names that you mentioned that I really like. We talked about Javon Kinlaw again, going after a guy that would weaken an opponent. He's been a bit of a disappointment, so I think you could get him. You probably want to pay him a little more, right?
You're going to have to
get him away from,
yes,
because he might be willing to do the 1-year prove it deal for San Francisco, but he's probably going to want to get a little more than that from an Arizona. But if you could get him on a 1-year $7.5 million contract, or even a 2-year $12 million contract, that would be ideal. I like him a lot. I like Tim Settle out of Buffalo. He's a big man. He plays. He doesn't play a whole lot of snaps, so he's not a guy that is going to cost a lot, but he would help kind of reinforce the defense. He's a stout guy, 6'3", 320 pounds, so not as tall or as long, but he's kind of that interior guy. Obviously, like you said, Christian Wilkins would be the guy. If you can just kind of pick a guy, he's a game wrecker. He's phenomenal. But you're talking about, probably a 4-year, $100 million type of contract for him. And by the way, worth every penny. Not saying he's not, but again, that goes back to the question of, is this the year that you do that, right? Is this the year you hand out those contracts, especially to a guy that's going to be, 29 by the end of the season? Again, completely worth it. One of the better defensive tackles in the NFL. Had 9 sacks this year. He's a great, really fun, great player. I just don't know if that's in the cards, no pun intended, type of stuff. But there are some smaller guys or other guys, that can get looked at. I think, a guy like Justin Jones that was with Chicago, their defense wasn't terrible this year. I think, he's a veteran that's played. He's been with the Chargers and then with the Bears, and he's done a nice job. I mean, 3 sacks, 4.5 sacks. He's not a big production guy, but a lot of times you don't need that, right? A lot of times you just need guys that can show up and get to 700 snaps on the interior defensive line, and that's what Jones did. His last contract wasn't huge. Again, I think it was a 2-year, $12 million. So you're probably looking at a slight bump from that, maybe 2 years, $15 million. I think, he would fit. You mentioned Sheldon Rankins. I think he's going to be right around his same contract, 9-10 million. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You mentioned this a while ago, but Sebastian Joseph Day, I don't think that would be a bad fit, you know. And then another local guy that just got let go, and he's a veteran, and he still played almost 500 snap. Lawrence Guy.
That name blows my mind. If you were to the fact if you were to look over the last decade and say who's going to have which Arizona State player is going to have the best NFL career, and it's Lawrence Guy, what the heck?
Yeah, I mean, just a guy that does his job, understands it, is not, he's not flashy by any means, but a dude that plays 500. I mean, you literally look at every year in New England: 582 snaps, 519 snaps, 523 snaps, 503 snaps, 530 snaps, 503 snaps, 521 snaps. Like, this dude is going to play 500 snaps, and he's going to be the ideal teammate, and that cannot be overlooked. I just don't think people understand how important that is.
Well, and that's the one thing is that that's something that matters greatly for the Cardinals, especially as they're in this early stage of rebuilding and kind of building a new culture, is that, Jonathan Gannon talked about love ball, put team first. These are guys, like, if they're not, you can have one or two divas as long as behind closed doors they're about their team. And yeah, you need those glue guys. You need those guys willing to fight for their teammates in the locker room. That is something that.
And let me say this, Jess, to that point, they need to come away with two guys from, and it doesn't have to be the group we mentioned. I mean, there's guys we didn't mention. It's actually a great year to need a defensive tackle. Like, just looking at the guys that played over 400 snaps this year, I mean, literally all of them would start with Arizona. Obviously, we've joked about that, but there are veterans. A Grover Stewart who's been around forever. Rakeem Nunez Roches is a veteran free agent. And then there's younger guys that have had success, like Greg Gaines, Derek Nandi, Jonathan Harris, like Benito Jones, like all these guys that are solid interior defensive linemen that played over 400 snaps. That's the biggest thing, is you want a guy that's consistently shown that he can. I mean, 300 is probably your cutoff, but consistently shown that he can play over 400 snaps that are available. And I'm not going to say it's going to make or break, or, I'm not going to try to be too hyperbolic, but like, I think it is important that they come away with a couple guys that can be difference makers for this defense.
We move to the edge for the pass rushers. There are names. You've got Daniil Hunter, big time player. You've got what's his name? Josh Allen, not the quarterback.
Yeah.
Not the quarterback. Brian Burns, another big time name. And those are your name guys. But if you look at some of the other players out there, Emmanuel Ogbo was let go just recently this week. He's going to be age 31. But as we talk about, the Cardinals are they need any pass rushers. Yeah. So, you could go younger. You got Chase Young. That's a flashy one. That's a kind of splash one, because I don't know if anyone's going to go all in on him. I wouldn't be shocked if someone did, because of the talent, but the production, I think people if a team's going to take a risk, but they're not going to take a big risk on him. Chase Young is a name we talked about with the Super Bowl, because we talked about the free agents in the Super Bowl. You go kind of down the list. Andrew Van Ginkel, he was a productive guy for Miami, made some plays. Guys that haven't been big, like guys that came out of the draft that we like, that haven't, you got AJ Epinesa coming out of Buffalo, Yetur Gross-Matos out of Carolina. These are names of guys that we loved coming out of the draft. Oh, another name that goes down the list who's going to get paid is Jonathan Grenard for the
Yeah,
Titans.
I was gonna say Grenard's a guy that I think you could get at like a 4-year, $60 million, which would be like a slight
and he
overpay, but it
and
would.
he'd absolutely be worth it.
Right, and he's only 20, he's 27, so you get him for his prime. Another name that I like is Josh Uche, the Patriots linebacker. I think he'd be a nice fit. Um, he's a he's a young guy. He'll be 26 this year. He's probably going to be like a 2 to 3 year at around 9 million a year. So I think he'd be a decent fit. And then there's some veterans that could fit too if they want to continue to go like the BJ Ojulari route and see what he can do. By the way, Uche had 11 and a half sacks in 2022 and then kind of had a down year this year going back to 3 sacks, but it's that production has been there. But a couple of the like veteran guys, Zadarius Smith is a free agent. He's going to command, probably a little bit more money, probably in the, in between Uche and Grenard. But like, if you add him, you've got a good veteran presence that had 5.5 sacks last year, had 10 the year before. So again, another nice kind of fit as a veteran. Leonard Floyd, he's up there at 32. You're probably going to get him a little less money. He's not, the guy that was in LA a couple years ago, right? But he is still a guy that can get you some production off the edge, even at 32 years old. He did have 10 and a half sacks this year. The last 4 years, 10 and a half, 9.5, 9, 10 and a half. He's projected to be like a 2-year, $20 million type of guy.
What do you think of a guy? This is one that Touchdown Wire talked about as kind of a sleeper. What about a guy like DJ Wanham out of Minnesota, who's he was opposite Danielle Hunter, but low key was okay productive.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk that they're going to want to keep him, and that's probably why I think he would be a great fit. I mean, though always the thing you have to remember with those guys, and like you said, he had 8 sacks last year, 4 sacks the year before, but 8 sacks his second year. So he's had 2 highly productive seasons as the guy opposite of Danielle Hunter. That's just what you have to worry about is a guy when guys get away from where they're at, if they're going to be able to show anything. The other thing you have to wonder or take an eye on, and it doesn't mean anything because all these teams are run so poorly, but would they really let one of them go if they let Danielle Hunter go? Like that wouldn't make a ton of sense, right?
It wouldn't. No, it wouldn't.
So then you do wonder like what's the issue with him. Another name that we didn't mention that I like is Bryce Huff from the Jets, right? He had a nice season. He's a guy that could fit, and he's going to only be 26 this year. So, and he's coming off a 10 sack season. Obviously, you always want to be careful with those guys that have the one big year. But you look at Huff's production 2, 2, 3.5, 10, and that 10 coincided with his snap count rising. He only played 191 snaps in 2022. He played 480 last year, so he got double the time and triple the production. But even if he got double the production at 7 sacks, that would have been great for the Cardinals, right? And he's only projected to be like a 4-year, $40 million type of guy. So he could end up being like a steal.
Yeah. As we go off the ball, the Cardinals do have a need opposite alongside of Kaiser White. There are nice names out there, but the Cardinals probably aren't going to. They're probably not going to splash, they needed a Mike Backer last year, and their biggest splash, the largest contract they gave out in free agency last year, which is Kaiser White's 2 years, $10 million. And so, something to talk about when we have our other show. Devin White's out there, Bobby Wagner, good old Isaiah Simmons. Arguably, some of the best. Frankie Louvu out of Carolina, Levante David, although, going to be age 34 this season.
And I think he just said he won't go anywhere else, that he'll retire if the Bucks don't bring him back.
That makes sense. But you've got some younger guys, too. Probably Jordan Brooks, Kenneth Murray. Those are the linebackers that came out in the Isaiah Simmons draft.
Right. One of the guys I really like is Josie Jewell, the linebacker out of Denver. He's projected to be 2 years, $13 million-ish. So not a ton of money. 29 years old, but he's been really good, and I think he'd fit really well next to Kaiser, because it allow Kaiser to kind of be more of the run and chase linebacker instead of the true Mike. I like Blake Cashman from Houston.
You saw that game that he had against the Cardinals. Holy crap.
Right. The concern being, if you get him, he's never played that well before, so you get him away from D'Amico Ryan's defense. Is he going to fall flat? Is he, and then the kind of bigger name, a guy that I really like, Aziz Al-Shahir. I believe he was with the 49ers.
He used to be, yeah. He was the other linebacker, not Fred Warner or Dre Greenlaw before Oren Burks this last season.
Yeah, and so I think he would be a nice fit, kind of give that same physicality, and you're looking at a guy that's like, probably $20 million over three years.
We talked about Drew Tranquil from the Chiefs. I liked him. Sione Takitaki for the Browns, another guy that could fill that role. You mentioned Blake Cashman, Zach Cunningham. They when he played, they were better against the run. Philadelphia was. Then you go down the line. Some other ones down here. Anthony Walker was, like, a couple years ago when he left Washington. He was kind of a heralded guy, but not kind of the same thing. There's names I remember a couple of years. Low key, I wouldn't mind a guy like Troy Reeder, honestly, who's going to be entering his age 30 year. He's a physical guy. Played for the Rams, in that defense there. Yeah, it's not, but we know they're not going to go splash at linebacker because they just don't believe that. And so you're looking for value with production. And I think those are kind of the names that you can kind of, and without getting too old, right? If they don't bring back Josh Woods, they don't bring back Chris Barnes, you've got these guys that you can go after and kind of have those ones. Actually, a guy that I was super intrigued in, but just re-signed with the Lions, is Jalen Reeves-Maben, who got a big contract, like the biggest core special team contract ever. But he's more than just a special teamer. Like, the truth is that I know that was when that tweet came out, when that report came out, that was always agents speaking. The largest contract for a core special teamer ever. Well, he played on defense too. He was the guy that basically took over Josh Woods' role and thrived. But so I thought when they were in the playoffs, he was one of the free agents I'd always mentioned. But the Lions just took care of him and got him for, I think, 2 years and around 10. He got basically a Kaiser White contract, right?
Right.
Let's look at the cornerback position. Okay. There's some expensive. You've got names like Stephon Gilmore. You've got Adoree Jackson, Kendall Fuller.
Yeah, Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed. Let me ask you this on L'Jarius. Would you trade 35 for him?
100%. Yeah, 100% I would.
So, I mean, that's an avenue they can explore because they're looking at the tag and trade
Yes, so
with
that the
him.
tag and trade would. So that's the thing is like, would do you think Kansas City would expect at least a first, since with the franchise it'd be like a sign away on the franchise would be two firsts. Do you think that they would expect 27?
I mean, they can ask for it, and the Cardinals can say no, and then they can come back to it. I mean, that's the nice thing, and for the Cardinals, they could treat it almost like what they did with Hollywood, where they go in with if these guys don't make it to 27 or
Yeah.
35, then we move on. But I think he's an intriguing fit. Kendall Fuller, you mentioned him. I mean, the problem is he's going to be age 30 this year. But on the flip side, he's phenomenal. So it's like he who he kind of reminds me of is Darius Slay when they signed him
Yeah.
from or when they traded for him, I guess I should say, sorry, from Detroit to Philadelphia. It seems like a similar situation where they're kind of at the end of their peak, but their peak is still like
Still
they
high
probably
end.
still have like 1 or 2 years where they're potentially an all pro. So again, is that where you want to be, at 15 million a year, or is the age too much of a thing?
What about some guys that were heralded rookies when they were drafted? Jeff Okuda, C.J. Henderson. Did
He's
they?
getting Okuda's getting projected for wild numbers, man. Like I'm all about bringing in a guy like Okuda. I think that would be a great fit. But I've seen projections of him getting like 15 million a year, and I'm just like, I can't. I mean, it's not my money, so who am I to complain, right? But I just can't. The idea of giving him like 4 years, 60 million, and he hasn't really been great or healthy yet is crazy to me. But on the flip side, he'd play out his contract and still be under 30. So it's, how do you want to attack that position? Um, I'm guessing the other one you were going to mention would be CJ Henderson, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and Henderson, same type of thing. He's projected to get like more of a prove it deal type of thing. And if you could do that, I think that would fit. I would prefer that over paying Okuda. Um, the kid out of Dallas, whose name I can't pronounce, Noah.
Igbenigami.
Yeah,
Igbenigami. I remember
I would.
that draft.
Right. I would. He's a guy that I would be intrigued by because same type of thing. Picked in the first round, hasn't really worked out. They ended up going with um, the Diggs kid, and then obviously Deron Bland over him. So there are some options, and then there are some younger options too that have been kind of bouncing around
Here's the
that
thing.
look like
How about this guy? He's an All-Pro returner, but also started 13 games for the Packers, and Keyshawn Nixon.
I mean, I think a guy like Nixon would fit wonderfully in Arizona. And he's not projected to get a lot. So like you can bring him in, and if he doesn't work out, worst case, he's like you said, an all pro returner, right? And that would be ideal for the Cardinals with what they need. Um, it'll be interesting if they go the young route or the old route because they've got, there's a lot of young or older guys like Kenny Moore, Steven Nelson, who could come in and kind of fit exactly what they need, right? Obviously, Stephon Gilmore being a guy that would be the biggest one, but those guys would fit right away. A couple young guys that I like that haven't, you know, haven't really been, I don't want to say given a chance because that's probably not accurate, but haven't gotten as much run as I think they could. Dane Jackson, he played in Buffalo last year. He wasn't bad. And he got sub 600 snaps at corner. I think he would be an intriguing one. And then Miles Bryant out of out of New England. He did play a lot more last year, and he had a pretty good year. So, those guys, and then like a guy like Emmanuel Mosley, who's coming off an injury,
Yeah.
that had that really high and promising upside. Maybe you can get him because he's only 28, so like he could be a fit. I think I think this is a good year to need corners because I think you can walk away with a corner, two defensive tackles, and you depending on what you do with the corners and defensive tackles, you can end up with a guard as well.
A couple of names I want to throw out. And something to remember with the things that are happening are connections to previous teams. The Cardinals, former Titans, former Patriots, former Lions. Okay, former Lions who were drafted, and then guys connected to Nick Caserio. And so if we're gonna try and connect the dots, Okuda, that's a guy to watch. He was drafted while Dave Sears was there. Houston has Tavier Thomas, a pretty good slot guy coming out of there. Houston. Christian Fulton, drafted by the Titans a few years ago. And so it's something to keep an eye on for players who were, Dave Sears guys, Monty Ossenfort's guys, Nick Caserio guys. I think those are guys to kind of watch, especially an Okuda one. That's for is kind of if there's anyone that they make a splash on, like you're saying, numbers are out there. That would kind of make sense if Dave Sears was really sold on it. They like what they have. That could be a guy that they go out and get.
And if he's willing to sign off on that, right?
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise. Nope, we still. No, we're not doing that. I'm not transitioning out of there. Let's look at the safeties again. We don't think the Cardinals are going to go crazy on safeties, but if they end up trading Budda Baker, then there will obviously be the need to bring in the safeties, and there are some aging safeties out there. Let's be honest. You've got a 31-year-old, a 30-year-old Eddie Jackson, who's going to be a 34-year-old Micah Hyde, Jordan Whitehead, going to be 27. It's not aging. You've got Tayshaun Gibson that we talked about for the 49ers. He'll be 34. Kareem Jackson. You don't want to get Kareem Jackson. Nope. Never mind that. Kareem Jackson's a problem. Obviously, Winfield's going to get monster money. But how would they? There are names out there at safety that you could do. I mean, you could go, Jonathan Owens. The Simone Biles husband. Who actually came in with the Cardinals as an undrafted rookie back in the day. What are names worth looking at if and when, like we mentioned Gibson back before the Super Bowl, anyone worth taking a look at other than that?
I think Eddie Jackson would be an interesting one. He's a veteran. He just got released. He really fell off last year, but could have been the system. Mike Edwards is another one. He's a guy that has had a good couple year run and been on good defensive teams. You mentioned Gibson. A guy like Deshaun Elliott has been good with Miami, and he's 27. I don't know what the relationship between C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Jonathan Gannon is, but I don't know what the relationship with C.J. Gardner-Johnson and anybody is.
Right.
Yeah, I'm being honest. So, that's an interesting one. Those are the guys. I mean, would you want to bring in a Micah Hyde? I mean, he's going to be 34 this year. Still a very good safety, but is he really worth it? Jordan Fuller's done a really nice job. He had a down year, injury plagued down year last year, but he bounced back, I thought, well this year, and he was phenomenal in 2021. So there are some options if they end up, like you said, safety is a two-step process, but it is good to know the names that would be the second step, right?
What about Kyle Duggar, Patriots guy?
think that Duggar would be almost kind of redundant because he's another strong safety. So like if you're gonna go that route, and he's older than Buddha.
That's true.
It's just hard to remember how young Buddha is sometimes.
that is actually the truth. I'm not going to worry about the specialists. They do need a punter. But why spend time on that on this show? We'll wrap up
that and you never know what they're going to do.
Yeah. Last off season, they it was Nolan Cooney. We're like, Nolan Cooney won the job. And he clearly won the job over Matt Hawk. Matt Hawk, who'd been a starter his entire career. And then they cut him and signed Blake Gillikin, a guy we had never heard of, and then he ended up being fantastic. And the truth is, they don't, there aren't a lot of quality punters on the market.
Right.
So whatever. Yeah, not going to talk about that. They'll have a punter. It'll work out. And that'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C Red Podcast, episode 519. It's the first of our 2 free agency previews. We will be back in a couple of days for episode 520, where we so we've talked about names. What do we project? Well, what would we do? How would we do the roster? And then we'll kind of say, what do we think? We'll kind of do projections. It'll be a mix of what we do and what we think will happen. And so with that, we'll end this edition of the show. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again in a couple of days.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C Red Podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red C, be Red C Red, and of course, Rise Up C Red.